call him the blind lawyer. And Chen Guangcheng certainly blindsided the Chinese government this week after years of harassment at the hands of local officials. This young dissident managed to give the security guards stationed outside his house the slip. He's now thought to be at the US embassy in Beijing. All of this, of course, just days before Hillary Clinton arrives in China for a key summit on trade and security. And both the American and the Chinese governments have been silent on the issue of Chen Guangcheng. So what, if anything, will change as a result of this tricky diplomatic episode? Well, let me tell you who's joining me tonight. Jean-François Melio is a founder of the Asia Centre here in Paris. Good evening to you. Here on my left, Emmanuel Lancourt. He's the editor-in-chief of Monde Chinois. That's Chinese World, to you and me. He's here with us as well. Good evening, Emmanuel. And in London tonight, we're joined by Martin Jacques. He is the author of a book called When China Rules the World. Thanks very much indeed for being with us as well. First, though, Bob Fu is one of the few people to have spoken to Chen Guangcheng since he escaped a little over a week ago. He himself fled China 16 years ago, and today he works for the organisation he founded, China Aid, which campaigns for religious and political freedom. We're hoping to speak to him a little later in the programme. First, though, let's bring you up to date with where we are with this story so far.
Pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong rally in support of Chen Guangcheng. The Chinese activist is thought to have fled to the US embassy in Beijing, but his whereabouts are unclear. Chen has spoken out against corruption and forced abortions as part of China's one-child policy. He fled from his guarded home a week ago in Shandong province in eastern China. It's feared that his family will suffer further harassment at the hands of police. Members of the European Union have urged China to exercise restraint.
So we will now monitor the status of Chen's family and associates, and we look to the Chinese government to guarantee their rights, freedoms, and personal safety.
Chen is thought to be under US protection, which some believe could strain relations with China.
Is a huge slap in the face for China. This is something that they cannot explain to their citizens. If we're the second world economy, if we're respected by all the countries in the international community, how come our own citizens run under the protection of the Americans?
Chen's escape after 19 months of house arrest comes at a difficult time in US-China relations. US Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton are expected to attend a series of high-level economic and strategic talks in Beijing later this week.
All right, Jean-François Melio, a US delegation in Beijing starting tomorrow. Very thorny issue, of course, human rights between the United States and China. How far up the agenda will it be in the light of the Chen Guangcheng escape?
Well, of course, this is not making the situation easy, but we have to remember that many summits of the kind have been earmarked by various events. Actually, some events were on pure monetary issues. If you remember, maybe 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, when the former Treasury Secretary came to China, China took some provocative moves on the currency. So they were not really looking for easing up the relationship at a specific time. Now it's the other way around. Something happens in China against the China regime, possibly helped by the US regime. This being said, My line is to say that however important the human rights issue is in the US-China relationship, unfortunately, we have to say, it now ranks second vis-à-vis other issues which are quite priority, like diplomatic issues in the region and, of course, financial and monetary issues.
All right, let's talk a bit more about the United States and the leverage Obama has on this. But I am told that I am now joined on the line by Bob Fu, one of the few people to have spoken to Chen Guangcheng since he escaped. Thanks very much indeed for being with us tonight. First question, did you help Chen escape? And can you confirm he's in the US Embassy in Beijing?
Thank you for having me. Yes, he is confirmed in the U.S. diplomatic protection and in Beijing. And I should make it clear that there's no international conspiracy at all for his Chen's escape. And he just made it. I mean, he is a blind man. He was cut off from 7 years, from any communication from the outside world. He just planned this for months and, did not know there's a U.S.-China dialogue. So there is no conspiracy here.
And did you help him escape at all? Did you have anything to do with that?
No, I don't have anything to do in planning his escape at all. I mean, we were all, caught off guard. I mean, with surprise and, of course, with joy, he was able to make it. After he reached to a safe destination, he was able to alert some of the friends on the ground, and they went there and picked him up and drove him to Beijing and tried to hide him in different locations until they could not, and they have to find the safer location. So U.S. graciously, agreed to host him.
And I was going to ask you, what do you think of the U.S. position on this so far? President Obama's remained tight-lipped over the fate of Chen Guangcheng. What would you like to see the United States do?
Well, I think, this is a very, of course, delicate and sensitive issue. It involves a diplomatic, negotiation between U.S. and China for a quick solution. And I have been informed and been communicating with the U.S. administration officials, and I also learned deep knowledge about the Chinese government deliberation. And I think both sides wants to play a low key and try to find a best solution, a peaceful solution, and hopefully a quick solution. I think I'm still optimistic. Something could be reached, very soon. And because Chen is not a criminal, he's not a fugitive. He's just, under some extra legal, persecution, and the local government wants to silence him for the abuses he and his family had experienced.
His wife and daughter are still, of course, in China, in the village where he's from. How worried are you about them?
Well, I'm concerned, of course, that they are still in his village. They're still under the de facto house arrest. And but I'm also hopeful that the central government is engaged in the negotiation with the U.S. government. I think that will add more protection for his family members back to his village. And I think any solution for him and his wife, his immediate members, has to be a package to come to the U.S. Just meet as visitors for humanitarian basis.
Bob, Fu, apologies, we're losing you. Very poor quality on that line, but thank you very much indeed for joining us. Bob Fu from China Aid there, giving us his take on things. Emmanuel Lancourt, we've heard about the United States being in a tight spot here. They've got this meeting starting tomorrow, but China's in a real tight spot here as well. They could agree to let him seek asylum and move perhaps to the United States, or let him stay in China, but it is going to be difficult for them to operate from now on, isn't it?
This affair reminds me very much Fang Li's affair. Maybe you do agree. Just before Tiananmen Square, he took refuge also in the American embassy.
He was there for a year, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. But the context is quite different, because I'm just back from China and nobody speaks. I mean, the medias in China are completely controlled. There is a strong censorship and nobody speaks about Chen Guangcheng.
Now, I think we can take a quick listen to President Obama speaking last night in Washington. Here's what he had to say. He skipped over the affair. He didn't mention the dissident himself. But here's what he has to say about human rights in China.
What I would like to emphasize is that every time we meet with China, the issue of human rights comes up. It is our belief that not only is that the right thing to do because it comports with our principles and our belief in freedom and human rights, but also because we actually think China will be stronger as it opens up and liberalizes its own system.
Let's go to Martin Jacques in London. What's your view on the issue? It seems that human rights just isn't a priority for China at the moment.
Well, it's certainly not a priority in the way that we see it in the West. They have, as we know well, a different view about a lot of these questions, and it's not just the government that has a different view. I mean, this is well embedded in popular attitude as well. And I think that one of the, I mean, this is a tricky question. I agree with what Jean-François and Emmanuel have said. This is a tricky issue, but I want to stress something which is slightly different, and that is that there's a strong view in the West at the time that really, the issue, human rights caps all when it comes to attitudes towards China. And I think this is a complete blind alley, because actually it's a way of encouraging a kind of traditional sense of superiority. We are democratic, we have human rights, and the Chinese don't. So it becomes a sort of stick to beat them. And the Chinese deeply resent this. I mean, not just at a governmental level. They've said this to Europe from time to time. And the Chinese, as they've got stronger, feel not only more resentment.
Apologies, Martin. We're having terrible technical trouble tonight. We're having a lot of difficulty hearing you as well. Perhaps we can get that sorted out. In the meantime, let me come back to you, Jean-François. Just to pick up on what Martin was saying right here, we see human rights differently in the West as to how they see it in China. But when you see a man like this, extremely vulnerable, blind, he managed to escape, but he's had years and years and years of being under house arrest. He's talked about his wife being beaten up by local officials. He's talked about his 6-year-old daughter being followed to school and searched. I mean, by anyone's standards, this is pretty horrific, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I think what Martin Jacques meant was the political interpretation of human rights. I mean, it would be totally wrong to think from a Western point of view, and I believe this gentleman is Westerner as well, that the values are different. And when you are Chinese, you value life differently, and you value freedom, and you value, everything which we value very highly in a different way, just because it's China and because some material values have taken maybe the upper stance in the recent years, because China is becoming richer and richer, and people enjoy it, and all of a sudden they care less about the human rights. No, when you're Chinese, what you feel is, yes, you are a little bit freer than you were, especially in the cities 5-10 years ago. You enjoy it, but you still want to be even freer in the future. So any attempt is, of course, felt very strongly. And in the case of this gentleman, as you said, if we refer to the very old Confucian values, I mean, this is a typical case of someone being basically harassed and just punished in spite of its handicaps, just because of what he's promoting. And let's just remind that the line is promoting is a fight against the one-child policy in China and the abortion.
Right, he brought to light forced abortions and other such.
So China is not different in a way. That's what I'm trying to say.
Emmanuel, do you think that's the view of a lot of Chinese people, that they are willing to a certain extent to make the trade-off if they're seeing their quality of life gradually improve? They're willing to perhaps hesitate on getting greater political freedoms, on getting greater freedom of expression, greater religious freedoms, that kind of thing?
When we speak about the Beijing so-called consensus, we should say that it is indeed shared by the majority of the population. I mean, what Jean-François Di Miglio has previously said is true. Years after years, Chinese people feel richer. They have a strong benefit about this constant evolution with the support of the Chinese state. I mean, Chen Guangcheng is certainly more dangerous for the government by his position concerning the Minggong and all these immigrants in the countries, by supporting also the question of the abortion, you see. But concerning the human rights by themselves, this question is quite marginal, I will say, compared to some other issues. And Hillary Clinton will certainly speak about the antagonism between China and the US in the so-called Chinese Sea. I think it will be the main subject rather than speaking about human rights, I'm afraid.
Martin Jacques, did you want to come in on that? I understand we've got you back on the line.
Well, I agree with what Emmanuel's just said. I think that in terms of the relationship between the United States and China, the human rights issue has steadily gone down the agenda, actually, since the 90s. And the reason for this is because China is a lot more powerful now. The relationship has become much more multifaceted, and especially since the Western financial crisis in 2008, there's been a really serious shift in power from the United States to China. And I think that this is the Obamas handling both of this issue and a different one, but you could say there are some similarities, namely when Wang Lijun, the police chief, sought refuge in the consulate in Chengdu. I think that the Obama administration's being correct to avoid, a replay of the sort of, if you like, the Cold War situation where, every time a dissident or something sprouted up, then it became, a boxing match between the two superpowers. In those days, the Soviet Union and the United States. I think that.
But this is different, isn't it? Because this is somebody who has sought help from the United States, who's purposefully gone to U.S. diplomatic protection. We think it's the U.S. Embassy. Do they not have a duty to bring this up and to act?
There were plenty of dissidents in the Cold War era that did the same kind of thing. There were 10 a penny actually in that period. I think that clearly it's difficult. I agree that this is a difficult problem for both sides, and I don't know how it will come out in the wash. But I think hopefully some kind of relatively straightforward solution can be found, which doesn't allow the megaphones of diplomacy, to drown out the importance of this kind of relationship. And I do want to reinforce the point I made before, which is that there is a difficulty in our attitude towards democracy and human rights in China because we think we're superior about it. Now, I happen to think that the way they've handled Chen is wrong. I feel for his situation and what's happened to him. But I don't like the attitude in the West that assumes that we are superior to China. Okay,
Martin, hold that thought. We're going to have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll have the headlines for you in the second part of tonight's debate. Don't go away.
On May 6th, the French will elect their future president. Will it be François Hollande or Nicolas Sarkozy? Join the world's leading French media group and get live second-round presidential election news. France 24, Monte Carlo Doualiya and RFI bring you special coverage. Join our political experts and guests. Find out first, right here, who France's next president will be. Our correspondents report live from candidates' headquarters and the world's capitals. Our news staff is on the move for you. Join France 24, Monte Carlo Doualiya and RFI. Get the election news first, no matter where it happens.